That will be our focus for this morning with his presentation, and then we'll have a conversation after lunch that hopefully he will stay for and add responses and pieces along those lines. We've got a couple of administrative things to do before we get into that. We'll focus on Dr. Commodore's presentations and comments, and then we will still have our public comment period at the end of the day. Before Dr. Commodore's piece, I want to sort of alter that public comment piece a little bit, but I'll talk about that then. Before we do introductions, I'm going to bring up Assistant Commissioner Jim Koppel from DHS, because he's got some comments and words for the task force. Thank you.
Hi. Good morning. I'm a little belated. I wanted to come and thank everybody for serving on this and the work you've done so far and the work you're going to be doing. It's very important to us at the department and as part of our child support program to continue to be fresh and to be relevant to the needs of our children, but also the needs of the parents supporting those children. And so all of the discussions you have, while you might get mired in detail and take time to sort things out, are really important in the end, as we have one of the top child support programs in the country, and it's because of this kind of work that we're able to do that. So I wasn't here to start you out, but I did want to come and express my thanks for the work that you're doing. And then I also wanted to comment, I know there's been some discussion about, all these meetings are taped. All the mics are on, we tape the meetings. We will continue to do that, and that is part of the public record and the work of the committee. The filming as well is open. The reason for all of this is in the age of technology we have, virtually everything we do is taped, either by camera or audio, and it will continue to be that way. I think the only thing that we as a department have to do a better job of is letting people know that everything we do pretty much is a public record. We try to be as transparent as possible, and rather than try to, for whatever reasons, not have some type of a record, it's always better to have multiple public records. And in this case, today we are filming Dr. Commodore's remarks and discussions because they're so important and to the work that we're doing, and there are a number of members who won't be here today who can then watch the proceedings and catch up. So I just wanted to come by to clarify that what we are doing at the department and will continue to do is to be open to taping, both audio and video, of the proceedings. And I know that that's unique to and new to some of you, but it is really what we expect in conducting our business, and it's going to be that way going forward. So I just wanted to clarify that issue. And then again, I wanted to commend you for volunteering to coming and being on this. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of child support legislation that's going to be debated in this legislative session. We had a lot in the last one, a lot in the previous before that. Really great improvements that have been made and changes that I'm very proud of, and I look forward to the recommendations coming from here, and hopefully with the legislators that are serving on this work group, there'll be the ability to take those recommendations and smoothly transition them into statute. So, and Dr. Commodore, I appreciate you being here and helping us through this process, and hope you have a great discussion today. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it. And back on sort of our normal agenda piece, let's just do quick introductions, name and who you are representing. So Jimmy, and go around clockwise. Thank you.
Jimmy Lloyd, non-custodial.
Thank you.
Melissa Wicklund, I'm in the State Senate.
Jody Metcalf, Judicial Branch.
Jason Smith, non-custodial parent.
Tammy Campbell, Custodial Parent.
Pamela Wagner on behalf of the Minnesota State Bar Association Family Law Section.
Morning, I'm Jeff Jorgensen from the Department of Human Services in the Child Support Division.
Lisa Coombs from the Minnesota Family Support and Recovery Council, which is child support professionals.
Kathleen Haying, Minnesota County Attorneys Association. I'm Melissa's alternate today.
Good morning, Rachel Sublime. I'm Tribal 40 representative.
Great. Did we get all the task force members?
Charlie?
Anna's here too for legal age.
Oh, okay. Come on up. Excuse me. Come on up.
Hi, thank you. I believe Melinda Hartwell will be here this afternoon,
Okay.
not this morning.
There you go.
Oh, okay, I got it.
We'll drop you in. And if you can just give your name and who you're representing. I think you may have already had, but.
And Minnesota Legal Services Coalition.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Is there any other task force member? Yes.
I am Laura Pryor, Representative Pryor, and I
Oh,
was
oh.
not at the first meeting because I was not properly added to the group, so.
Okay, but you have been added to the
Yes.
to the task force.
Yes.
My apologies for not knowing that. We'll get a name tent here for you. Come on and sit back in place here, and just go around.
All right.
And I'll give you a marker and have you put your name on the card here. Yeah, just put your first name on it. That would be great. Thank you. Excuse me. The next piece up is to look at the meeting notes from the, and mine have disappeared, but the January meeting, any that you sent out, any comments, questions, edits on those notes? And as before, hearing none, we can move them on to the website. There's a couple of days before they go on, so if anybody finds an edit or typo, please let Elizabeth know. And we'll go from there. I'm going to combine action items and updates. And Elizabeth, I'll go to you for the action item, and then I'll come back to the whole group for updates.
Sure. There were just two action items from the last meeting. One was to gather up the questions that this group came up with at our last meeting and send to Dr. Comner and Dr. Benor. So those did get sent around. And then the second action item was responding to a question that had come up in the last meeting that you all had been sent a memo with the response to that. So that is also
Okay.
sent out. And the memo, all of the memos, anytime we have something like that where there's a question that we are responding to, we're now putting those memos on the website underneath the meeting where the question arose. So if you want to go back and say, hey, what was that memo about? It's on the website.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other updates? We're dancing these around, but anything else from DHS? Any other updates from the task force members? Okay, let's move beyond that. Thank you. Couple of pieces before we get into Dr. Commodore's presentation. One piece is because we are recording this, videotaping this. It will be made available to task force members after the session here. If you could state your name before you speak, that way we'll have that tie-in. So someone speaking, and the camera is only on Dr. Commodore, they will at least know where the question is coming from. So we'll just simply ask that. I may remind you a couple of times through the session with that. Dr. Commodore has graciously agreed to take questions as they come up. You're still comfortable with that, so we will allow that to happen. And this is a piece where slightly different process. We will allow questions to come up from the audience, but we would prefer to have you write them on cards. Again, we want the conversation to focus around the task force, but if you've got a question as we go through, write it on a card. I've got cards here, I've got pens here if folks need them, and then we'll either hand them to me or hand them to Elizabeth, and then we'll get them into the process. Also, I just want to double check while we're on audience, anybody planning on making public comment at the end of the meeting today? Okay, and it's, again, as before, I'll check a couple times through the day, and if you decide to make comment, all I'm trying to do is figure out the timing for that at the end of the day. With that, I think we're ready to have Dr. Commodore introduce himself, get the stuff. I'll blither on here for a few moments while Elizabeth gets the setup going. If folks have not ordered lunch, okay, this is the last chance to do it. Sign in for what you want, and I think it's what, $13?
Yes.
To get lunch. There's also lunch over at the MnDOT cafeteria, which is easily accessible by tunnel. The challenges with legislative session, it's you and the rest of the world that are trying to get through the line over there. And we'll roughly have about 45 minutes for lunch. And play that out. We'll take a break partway through the morning here, roughly, I've lost my clock, roughly in about an hour. Or a good breaking point for Dr. Commodore. Are we up and ready to go to a, can I stop blithering?
Yes.
All right.
I'm wondering if we should turn off the lights back there, or can everyone see it already?
Let's play, I'll play with the lights while we get out of here.
We're set. You just tell me when you want your slides advanced, and I'll do it.
Well, I hadn't expected theater in the round, but I'm really happy with it. And the first thing I want to say is thank you for having me. I will tell you that other states don't feel that. I have had reactions that another state, to go unmentioned, said, we always do it this way, and we don't want to even consider any other way, so we don't want them here. That was their right, of course, to do that. So when I received this invitation from Minnesota, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being open. Thank you for listening to me. You may or may not agree with anything I say, but I hope you'll at least listen. So thank you. I mean, I really mean that really sincerely. So that's the first. The second is, I'm a professor. I've never done anything else but be a professor. Well, I had 2 tours in government, but that's another story. But I'm a professor, and the only thing I know how to do is to run a classroom. So, I mean, I've done it for 50 years, so that's all I know how to do. So, with your permission, I'd like to run this like a classroom. And I can tell you that my students don't save their questions to the end. They blurb them out. And I have to sit on them and say, I'll answer that in a few moments, right? And I say that to them all the time. And they say, all right. And so that's what I'm used to. So feel free to behave the same way. The only silly question is this question not asked, right? That's what I tell my students, and so I say it to you. So please ask me what comes in your head. We have plenty of time, and I'd really like to have this as a discussion more than a lecture. Lectures are boring, you know, and that's not really where I think we learn anything. So please I mean this sincerely, please feel free to raise whatever comes to your mind. Because some of the stuff I'll say is a little controversial, and I want you to play it over with your head and talk to me about it, and talk among yourselves. Right? So I'd like to run this as a seminar as much as anything else. So I hope you will take that seriously.
Sorry to bug you, but I'm getting folks with technical equipment saying they need to hear you. So
Can I get a
please point
mic
that
on
out.
my, because I walk around. I can't help
I
it.
don't know that we've got a lapel mic.
Turn some of these mics.
Yeah.
Let's turn them in and then we can, oh, that's good.
You could strap one of these.
Yeah, right.
I'm not good at just sitting still.
Yeah.
You know, you can imagine me in class.
I think, we're getting, I'm getting positive signs that that's
All right,
picking you up, so
that's
I think we're okay. Thank
all
you,
right.
guys.
So, and I know the audience has a separate regimen for questions. That's their decision, not mine, I want you to know. And so I'm happy to have you guys interact as well as possible, subject to your rules. All right, so that's the first one. The next thing I want to say is that there's a real distinction between policy and economics. Making policy depends on a lot of stuff beyond economics. And I can say that because I was once a policymaker. Doing economics is a discipline that has insight for policy, but is not the same thing as policy. And I want you to recognize that my expertise is in economics more than it is in policy. So, I got a PhD 1,000 years ago, and that's all I've done. So, I want to deal with the economics issues before us. I'll deal somewhat with policy, but that's not where my expertise lies. So I think it's important that you keep those things different. And I hope you'll mainly listen to me about the economics. After all, cost is an economic concept. And so that's really what I want to emphasize. Cost. Now, how you go from the cost of rearing children to the child support awards, that's a policy issue, as much as it is an economic issue. But I'd like you to, emphasize that that's a different matter than the one I'm going to really focus on. Right? Any questions about that? I mean, I don't want to just talk at you. I really want to see whether you agree or disagree or what. Any comments about that? There really is a distinction here. And that's important, I think, in terms of what I want to talk about. What is economics? It's a discipline which focuses on economic models. The reason why we deal with models is because the world out there is so complicated that it's beyond most of our comprehensions as to how to deal with it. And besides, for the most part, we want to deal with average values. When you set guidelines, those are for average cases. Now, judges can deviate from these guidelines, of course, but we all know they rarely do, for understandable reasons. And so we deal with averages, and economics is a focus on average values, for the most part. And so the reason why we deal with models is these are models that focus on the typical or characteristic features of what's going on. And what happens is that economists have different models in mind. when you hear the argument that economists always disagree, that's both true and false. It's false in that we don't disagree, in that's the science of economics. What's true about that is that economists disagree because we differ in terms of which model is relevant for the situation at hand. Person A says, we should use this model, and that will tell us better about what's going on. Person B says, no, that's a bad model, we should do another model. And person C says, no, both are wrong, we should use the third. Right? And in fact, what we're going to deal with today is 3 models of measuring the cost of rearing children. And I'm going to talk about each of these models. And obviously I'm going to talk about it from my vantage point. A month from now you'll have another economist, a well-known, reputable economist, who I expect will emphasize a different model. And that's fine too. It's up to you to decide about which model is relevant. And again, I thank you for listening to me in terms of what model I want to sort of emphasize. And I hope that you will put whatever questions you have to the economist that's coming next month. And so you should. You should try to understand how these models differ and why they differ. Because they have major implications for what you do. The relevant economic model is an important factor that's at issue here. Let me emphasize that when we deal with the cost of rearing children, it's not, please underline not, it's not a data issue. It's not a data issue because we all use the same data. I don't know whether that's been emphasized enough. We all use the same data. There's only one set of data that's really out there, which is collected by probably the best data collection agency in the world, which is the U.S. Census Bureau. And the U.S. Census Bureau collects data on consumer expenditures. And what is striking is that everyone in this business uses the same data. If you go to the USDA reports, they say right out front, they use the data from the Bureau of the Census. And so do I. The data is easy to get. It's not easy to use, but it's easy to get. It costs you something like $35 or $40 for a disk for a year. Right? And we could pay it. And so what's more difficult is finding a computer help to actually, use the data. But the data's there and available. And we all use the same data. So you have not to think that that any of these results are based on different data. Well, if they're not based on different data, what are they based on? They're based on different economic models. And economists differ because we emphasize different models in which to apply the data. So the issue for you to decide, really, is which model you consider to be the more relevant one. And that's your call, not mine. Right? I'm going to give you my views, and you're going to make whatever decisions you decide to make. And it will turn on not the data, but the models. So what I want to talk about today really are the three different models that are in play. One is advanced by the USDA, which forms the basis of the Minnesota guidelines. The other is advanced by Dr. Venor, which is based on income equivalence methods. And then there's the model which underlies my own results, which were published about 1.5 years ago, which I produced with two colleagues. And let me emphasize that we're the new boys in town, right? This is our approach is somewhat new and different, and that's why I'm so appreciative of you having me here, so that I can at least put forth what we think, and then you can see whether you agree or disagree, which is fine. Okay. Oh, finally, as you know very well, there's a lot of steps that go from determining the cost of rearing children to appropriate child support guidelines. A lot of steps there. And I want to say that I'm not going to deal with them. Those are policy issues. And I have some views about them, of course. But they're not economics, really. So I'm going to focus on not so much the mechanism or the issues or the decisions which go from starting with the cost of rearing children to the guidelines, but rather how you should determine the cost of rearing children. And I'm going to emphasize that those costs depend not on the data, but rather on the economic models which apply the data. What lies at the heart of the issues is the models, not the data, and it's not the policy decisions. This is an economic issue. It's an economic issue. Some of you may have had economics, some of you may not, but I'll try to keep it at a level where everybody can understand. Every field has jargon. Let me tell you, economics is the worst among that. I mean, I could talk about homothetic utility functions and put you all to sleep. And so that's not my purpose here, right? And yet, it turns out that issue underlies the difference in the models. And who the hell knows what that means? I'll try to explain. Any questions? Let's have it. I mean, before I get into the details, we have time. I'd like to go around the room and see what you guys think about what I've said. Do you have any problems with it? I'd really like to hear from you. I don't want, yeah.
This is Jeff Jorgensen. I just had a question, and you'll probably get into it, but you mentioned the 3 different models.
Right.
Can you speak to how difficult it would be to create a 4th model? One of the questions I think we've had before was, what if we wanted to have something specific to our state? How difficult is it to create a model, if that makes sense?
Well, there's 2 issues about here. The first is the models are not state specific. They're based on typical actions that one expects parents to take with regard to children. And these are based on assumptions, right? And so they're not state specific, they're preference specific. They're based on preference.